Jerusalem, without doubt, is the most revered holy city in the world, with a history stretching back almost 5,000 years. It has been at the epicenter of three of the world's major religions, with Jews, Christians, and Muslims each laying claim to the holy city. This has, perhaps unsurprisingly, resulted in Jerusalem being one of the most disputed and fought over places anywhere in the world. The city has been the prized possession of empires, kingdoms, and religious movements over the centuries, leading it to change hands no fewer than 40 times. The repercussions generated from these long-standing grievances have continued to leave their mark on Jerusalem well into the 21st century. But how did this city, which began as little more than a settlement around a water spring, become one of the most religiously and politically contentious places on earth? This is how Jerusalem became the world's holiest city. The earliest history of Jerusalem dates back to 3000 BC, when the foundations of the settlement were first established near the Gihon spring. This major water source enabled Jerusalem's earliest inhabitants to transform what was otherwise a barren and arid landscape into what would one day become one of the most important cities in the world. By around 2000 BC, Jerusalem lay just beyond the borders of the Middle Egyptian kingdom. It was around this time that the first known written mention of the city, Jerusalem, was recorded in Egyptian documents. The city itself was occupied by a people known as the Canaanites, who had built a large stone wall around the settlement to protect its valuable water source. By 1500 BC, the city had come under the rule of the Egyptian New Kingdom as a vassal state, forming part of their territory which stretched from the Sahara all the way to the borders of what is now Turkey. The power of the Egyptians began to decline by the 12th century BC during a period of history known as the Late Bronze Age collapse. This era saw many empires and civilizations across the eastern Mediterranean fall into rapid and often violent decline. In their wake arose many smaller independent kingdoms across the region, one of which was the Israelites, a faction of the Canaanites who, according to biblical tradition, were led by King David and came to occupy Jerusalem by 1000 BC, making it the capital of their new kingdom of Israel. During the reign of David's successor, King Solomon, a grand temple, later known as the Temple of Solomon, was constructed within the city, cementing its status as a major cultural and religious site for what would evolve into the Judaic religion. Within a century, however, the Kingdom of Israel had split in two, with the northern half remaining under its rule while the southern half became the Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its capital. Over the next 400 years, Jerusalem developed as the epicenter of the Jewish faith and culture, although it faced frequent attacks by its more powerful neighbors, namely the Egyptian and Assyrian kingdoms, who were both vying for dominance across the region. Then, in the 6th century BC, Jerusalem experienced the first of what would be several pivotal transitions of power in its history. The successor to the powerful Assyrian Empire in the region was the Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar II. He sought to expand his territorial holdings and successfully besieged Jerusalem in 597 BC. Despite taking the city, the Babylonians faced significant resistance from the local Jewish population, which ultimately led to a rebellion just over a decade later in 587 BC. In response, Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem once more and destroyed much of the city, including Solomon's temple. This act of retribution was furthered by his order for the expulsion of the city's Jewish inhabitants, who were subsequently exiled to parts of Babylonia in the east. Jerusalem remained part of the Babylonian Empire for the next 40 years until it was absorbed by the rapidly expanding successor empire of the Achaemenids under King Cyrus the Great. Cyrus allowed many of the exiled Jews to return to Jerusalem and rebuild the city, including its temple. Over the following 200 years, further waves of exiled Jews and their descendants returned to Jerusalem. However, they still did not control the city for themselves. In 332 BC, possession of Jerusalem changed hands yet again when Alexander the Great conquered it as part of his campaign against the Persian Empire. Alexander's reign over the enormous empire he carved out for himself was short-lived, and following his death in 323 BC, it was divided among his generals. Jerusalem initially fell under the control of the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. However, following several centuries of almost constant warfare, it passed into the control of the Seleucids in 198 BC. Starting under Alexander's reign and continuing under subsequent Ptolemaic and Seleucid rule, many Jews within Jerusalem adopted Greek culture. Although this shift away from traditional Judean practices eventually provoked unrest, it erupted into rebellion during the 160s BC, led by a Jewish group known as the Maccabees. They captured Jerusalem in 164 BC and restored Jewish worship at the Temple, an event still celebrated today in the Jewish festival of Hanukkah. Following what became known as the Maccabean Revolt, Jerusalem became the capital of a semi-autonomous region within the wider Seleucid Empire and later formed the center of the fully independent Hasmonean Kingdom, which lasted for over a century. This period of independence came to an end in 37 BC following the rise of Herod the Great, who captured the city and established his reign as a client king of the rapidly expanding Roman Republic. Within just 30 years of this, the Roman Republic went on to absorb Jerusalem as part of the province of Judea, which it now governed under direct rule. During its incorporation under Roman rule in the early 1st century CE, Jerusalem's population reached an estimated 70,000 to 100,000 people. The vast majority were Jewish, yet a small but growing minority had become converts to a new sect of Judaism that had emerged within the city following the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. As a result, Jerusalem became the birthplace of early Christianity, with the apostles spreading the teachings of Jesus and establishing the faith's first churches, which expanded across the region in subsequent years. Jerusalem's status as a center of religious worship, however, brought with it its own set of problems. The Roman authorities, who practiced paganism, viewed both Judaism and the new Christianity as threats to their rule and introduced suppressive measures on religious practice. In 66 CE, the Jewish population of Judea rose up in rebellion against Roman rule, sparking the First Jewish-Roman War, also known as the Great Revolt. Jerusalem was the epicenter of the rebellion and attracted the full force of the Roman response. Following a 5-month siege in 70 CE, Roman legions reconquered the city and destroyed much of it. The Second Temple was razed to the ground, leaving only its great external walls, a surviving portion of which is now known as the Western Wall and remains a sacred site in Jewish worship to this day. Following its destruction, Jerusalem was rebuilt as the Roman colony of Aelia Capitolina, with Jewish people explicitly forbidden from entering the city except on a few select holy days. This led to another revolt in 132 CE, which was brutally suppressed by Emperor Hadrian. He intensified the Romanization of the city by constructing a forum and a temple dedicated to Jupiter on the site formerly occupied by the Jewish temple. With the expulsion of Jews from the city, Jerusalem became a center of predominantly Christian worship. The Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, himself a convert to Christianity, sent his mother Helena to Jerusalem to locate the site of Jesus' crucifixion and burial. The Roman temple built under Hadrian was demolished, and in its place the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was constructed in 335 CE, becoming the focal point of Christian worship within the city. By the turn of the 5th century, the Roman Empire had begun to decline, although its eastern territories remained relatively intact. The Byzantine Empire, which emerged as the spiritual successor to Rome, maintained control of Jerusalem for nearly 300 years and championed its position as the holiest place in Christendom. However, an entirely new power, and an entirely new religion, was about to leave its mark upon the holy city. The emergence of Islam in the Arabian Peninsula at the outset of the 7th century ushered in a new chapter in Jerusalem's history. The city quickly gained sacred significance for Muslims, as it was believed that the Prophet Muhammad had journeyed there in a single night. Following Muhammad's death in 632, the Rashidun Caliphate united the Muslims of Arabia and began spreading Islam across the region. In 638, Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab led Muslim armies to the gates of Jerusalem and successfully captured it from the Byzantines. Despite being under Muslim rule, Jerusalem flourished as a city of religious tolerance, where freedom of worship was granted to all inhabitants regardless of faith. Although it retained a predominantly Christian population, the Islamic Caliphate allowed Jews to return and worship freely in the city, lifting the nearly 300-year ban imposed by the Romans and Byzantines. Within just over 100 years, under the governance of the Umayyad dynasty in the late 7th and early 8th centuries, Jerusalem gained two of Islam's most sacred sites, the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. These developments firmly established Islam as an integral part of Jerusalem's identity alongside Judaism and Christianity. As the dawn of the new millennium approached, the era of religious tolerance in Jerusalem began to wane. In 969, the Fatimid Caliphate captured Jerusalem as part of their conquest of Egypt and Syria. Christian and Jewish pilgrims were still permitted to visit the city, although over time restrictions and persecution increased. One infamous event occurred in 1009, when Caliph al-Hakim Ba'amr Allah ordered the destruction of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, sending shockwaves throughout the Christian world. The Great Schism of 1054 further complicated matters, dividing the Christian world between the Roman Catholic Church in the west and the Greek Orthodox Church in the east. Jerusalem came under the jurisdiction of the Greek Orthodox Church centered in Constantinople, much to the outrage of the papacy in Rome. By the late 11th century, Jerusalem fell to the Seljuk Turks, triggering instability and reports of pilgrim harassment. In response, Pope Urban II called for a holy crusade in 1095. In June 1099, Crusader armies besieged Jerusalem and captured it, unleashing a massacre that decimated Muslim and Jewish populations. Jerusalem remained a focal point of conflict throughout the Crusades until it was recaptured by Saladin in 1187. Control continued to shift until the final Crusader defeat in 1291. Under the Mamluks and later the Ottoman Empire, Jerusalem experienced periods of tolerance, decline, and renewal. In 1917, British forces captured Jerusalem during World War I, ushering in the era of the British Mandate. Rising Jewish immigration and Arab opposition intensified tensions, culminating in the 1947 UN Partition Plan and the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, which divided the city. Despite repeated efforts to resolve the conflict, the centuries-old struggle over control of the world's holiest city continues to this day, evoking passionate claims from all sides and shaping global history before our very eyes.